Hello and welcome to lesson 3 on cybersecurity. This one is all about encryption. As usual, a quick starter to begin with. This time it's something a little different. It's a word search. So spend a few minutes, see how many of the keywords that we've looked at so far: hacking, keylogger, ransomware, phishing, malware, antivirus, backups, black hat, grey hat and white hat you can find in this word search. When either you've found the words or you've given up, unpause the video and we'll carry on. Okay, right, so we're going to look a little bit at encryption today, but I need to explain first of all what we mean by data security. So far, we've looked at quite a lot about what personal harm can come to you as a result of cyber attacks. But also, we need to think about the security of data. Businesses in particular live or die by their data. If they've got information, if they've got data that's been gathered up over years and they use that to make their products, if that was to fall into the wrong hands, either rival companies or blackmailers, it could be a serious problem for them. So being able to prevent others from seeing their data is really, really important. To do that, they tend to use something called encryption. Now, you've looked at encryption before, but we're going to visit it again just for this lesson as part of cybersecurity. Encryption means altering data so that it cannot be read by anyone other than the intended recipient. So if we take this diagram to represent it, we have over at the far side there plain text. The plain text is unencrypted data. It's called plain text, but it doesn't actually have to be text. It can be anything. It can be a database, it can be images, it can be video, whatever. It's called plain text if it hasn't been encrypted. It then gets encrypted by using a key. Now, a key is a piece of information that's needed to encrypt the data. We'll look at examples of keys shortly. And as that key and plain text are combined, out the other side comes ciphertext. Ciphertext is the result of the encryption. It can only be turned back into plain text with the correct key. So let's make some quick notes on that before we look at an example. So in your books, can you write down that encryption is the process of making data unreadable to anyone other than the intended recipient, and that plain text is encrypted using a key to produce ciphertext. Unpause the video when you finish making your notes. All right, let's look at an example. This is an encryption called the Caesar cipher. It's one of the most well-known, and it was in use nearly 2,000 years ago when Julius Caesar used it to send information to his generals. So in order to protect his orders that were being sent out to his various battles from being intercepted and read by the enemy, he used a very simple system. He shifted every letter in the alphabet by 3. So if we take the alphabets here and the blue one, we move along like that. Then to encrypt dog, D encrypts to A, O encrypts to L, and G encrypts to D. So DOG becomes ALD. His entire orders would be encrypted like that and sent on their way. Now that seems pretty quaint to us nowadays. You can't imagine if something like that happened, anyone would have much trouble deciphering it. But this was 2,000 years ago, and apparently it was fairly effective. So I want you to have a quick go at one. So I want you to decrypt the following ciphertext. So this ciphertext in blue here, it's encrypted using a Caesar cipher with a key of 5. So the key in this case is the number of places the alphabet has been shifted. In the example we just looked at, it was shifted by 3. In this one, it's been shifted by 5. So can you figure out what that message says? Unpause the video when you reckon you've got it. Okay, you may have had issues with which way to shift the numbers. So if we take that R, do we add 5 places on or do we subtract 5 places? Well, what of course you could do is just try both of them. One of them will come up with a sentence that makes sense and one of them will come up with a random jumble of letters, and you can pretty quickly work out which is which. So had you shifted it the correct way, you would end up with that sentence. My nose is itchy. Well done if you managed that. The problem with Caesar cipher, as I alluded to earlier, is that it's not very strong. In fact, it's very easy to crack. Cracking is the proper term for obtaining the plain text from the ciphertext without the use of the key. A good cipher is one that's difficult to crack, and the Caesar cipher is not difficult to crack. Well, probably one of the easiest ways we could go about cracking the Caesar cipher is just simply to brute force it. Brute forcing means trying every possible key until you get lucky. With the Caesar cipher, there are only 26 possible keys. You can shift it one place, or two places, or three places, or four places, up to 26 places. If you shift it again, you're back around to A and you're exactly where you started. So only 26 possible shifts. So we might as well just try cracking it by shifting once and seeing if it makes sense. Shifting again, see if it makes sense. Shifting another time, see if it makes sense. So if we start up the word there, L-I-P-P-S, let's shift it once. It comes up with K-H-O-O-R. Makes no sense. Shift it again, comes up with J-G-N-N-Q. Makes no sense. Shift it again, shift it again. Eventually, after 4 shifts, we get hello. Could be a coincidence, but quite likely that's now the correct key. We apply that to the rest of the message and hey presto, it's cracked. So brute forcing is a very simple cracking method. You try every possible cracking system you can come up with, every possible combination of keys, and one of them works. So your task is to crack this code here. The one at the bottom there, UG, NMMB, etc. It is encrypted with a Caesar cipher, but I'm not going to tell you the key. Now you can do it pen and paper. In fact, you could do it pen and paper in a couple of minutes, really. But if you want some help with it, you can use this website here, which will allow you to put in the ciphertext, and it will show you the various different keys and what text comes out with, and you can figure out which one's meant to be real. Either way, see if you can crack it. Unpause the video when you're done. Okay. A more difficult cipher to crack is a substitution cipher. Now that's not saying it's impossible to crack. It definitely isn't. It's entirely crackable. But brute forcing isn't really an option, and we'll look at why in a second. In a substitution cipher, rather than shifting the alphabet along by a certain amount, this time we shuffle the alphabet completely randomly and then assign each letter to its equivalent. So in this case, every A would match to O, every B would match to U, every C would become G, every D would become B, every E would become N, etc. And the key for this one is this jumbled alphabet along the bottom. Without that alphabet there, there's no way to decrypt it. Or is there? See, if we tried to brute force it, like we did with the Caesar cipher, whereas the Caesar cipher only had 26 possible combinations, 26 possible keys, this one has 67 million possible keys, give or take. Now, for a human, that's not feasible. We can't write out 67 million different alphabet combinations and then try them all until we get something that's recognizable. However, for a computer, that's entirely reasonable. They could do 67 million possible combinations in a matter of microseconds. But for a human, not so much. So if a human was trying to crack this, brute force is now not an option. But we do have other options. We can use a statistical attack. In this case, we take some estimations and reasonable guesses at what a letter is likely to be. Let's look at an example and have a look at how a statistical attack might work. So first of all, we've got this text here. This is encrypted using a substitution cipher. We know we can't brute force it. We have no idea what each letter maps to. But we can take a few statistics. We can take a few things that we know about the English language, if we're assuming this is written in English. First of all, there are only 2 common words that are 1 letter in length, A and I, with A being the most common. So in this one here, L appears by itself there and over at this side. So L is probably A, and if it's not, it's almost certainly I. So we've got one thing we can make an estimation at to begin with. The most commonly used letter in the English language is E. So if we were to count up all these letters and work out which one shows up most often, that one would probably be E. And the most likely 3-letter word to appear at the start of a sentence is the. Now our first sentence here has a 3-letter word at the start, so that's probably the. Any one of these might not be right, but it's a good starting place, and it means we can make a start at cracking this. So let's use these. we're going to think that L here is going to be either A or I. I'm going to go with A to begin with because that is marginally more common than I. G appears most often when you count all these up, so we're going to assume that's E, and we're going to assume that RWG is probably the, because it was the first word in the sentence over here. So that means we'll substitute out L for I, G for E, and RW for TH, and then we end up with this at the bottom. Still not readable, but the letters in red that are capital are the ones that have been decrypted, and it seems to work. So let's see where we go next. If we look at this, there's a word here that's mostly complete. TH something something E. Well, that could be these, it could be three, but that's not going to work because we know E, what E is. So F and S are definitely not E. The only word I can think of that could be that's commonly used is those. So let's assume that's right. Let's assume that F and S are O and S and substitute those in. We get this. And that seems to be okay so far. There's nothing jumps out as being something that won't work. Assuming that's right, there's a phrase there, Q, OES, U, NOT. So something OES, something OT. That's probably does not. That's a word combination that goes together a lot and would fit nicely there. So let's assume that's right. Replace the Q with a D and the U with an N. Let's put that in. And now we've got this. This looks pretty good so far. Again, nothing's jumping out as being something that wouldn't go together. So we keep going with that same tactic. So here we've got a couple of words. I'm going to guess that that top one there is contains, and this one bottom down here is letters. Again, could be wrong, but by substituting those, we end up with this. And at this point, it's starting to be really clear what a few of those are. The second word is probably alphabet. There's a big word there that's probably mathematics. There's a two-letter word that ends in E. So that's going to be me, possibly, although I think M has already been used. All those things are now fairly crackable. And we keep going, and we've got it cracked. So we didn't brute force it. We used statistics. We looked at the likelihood of certain things happening in certain combinations, and we exploited that. That's how a statistical attack can break it. Now, modern encryption obviously doesn't use systems like that. Those are historical ones, there to give you an idea of how encryption can work. Modern encryption obviously uses very complex maths to make computer data unreadable. One of the most widely used systems is called RSA. Now, RSA can use a key of different lengths, the longest being 2048 bits. Now, the longer the key is, the harder it is to crack. If a computer was going to brute force RSS 2048 key, it would take around 300 trillion years. That's how many different combinations are possible. And statistical attacks are also very difficult because of the maths, the way it's used. This type of encryption is referred to as being computationally secure. It can be cracked. My computer can crack it in 300 trillion years time, but it can do it. So it's not uncrackable. It's certainly not unbeatable, but it can't be cracked in a reasonable time frame with the equipment we currently have. And that's what's important. It's only computationally secure. It's not fully secure. For example, currently, lots of big companies are working on quantum computers. Theoretically, they are entirely possible to make, but we haven't been able to do it yet. The maths shows that a quantum computer, fully functioning, would crack RSA 2048 in about 10 seconds. That's considerably quicker than the 300 trillion years a traditional computer takes. But quantum computers don't exist yet. There are versions of quantum computers that now exist, but they're very limited and don't perform much faster than traditional ones because of their limitations. But as we beat those limitations and as they get better, this kind of encryption is going to become useless. Obviously, we need a better type of encryption that's resilient to quantum computers, and I'm sure that will be devised. But that's why we don't say that RSS is secure. It isn't. It's computationally secure with what we have now. So that's quite a bit to get down in your notes. So pause the video in a second and make these notes. Cracking encryption is decrypting it without the key. Encryption can be cracked using brute force or statistical attacks. Brute force is trying every possible key until you get lucky, and the statistical attack is using estimates and knowledge about the message to make educated guesses. Modern encryption is computationally secure. It cannot be cracked in a reasonable time using current equipment. Unpause the video when you're done. Okay. So the assess task, as always, a quiz on the VLE. Have a go at that. We've got a couple of extension tasks for you if you've got time left over. First of all, I want you to investigate a new type of cipher that we haven't looked at today called a rail fence cipher. A rail fence cipher is another way of taking text and making it unreadable. Again, it's not something that's used digitally, it's not something that works on a computer, but it's an interesting one to look at. So using that link, investigate a rail fence and use it to encrypt a sentence. Now ideally, swap it with someone else and see if they can decrypt it, but you still need to upload to the VLE your plain text and your ciphertext and any key that you needed to encrypt it. See if you've got the hang of it. And then there's actually another one, which is a mega challenge. I had a go at this and it is doable. It feels daunting at first, but I got a couple of lucky guesses early on and then was very quickly able to finish it off. So I want you to see if you can crack this substitution cipher. This will have to be a statistical attack. To get you started, I've given you down there the frequencies of each letter in the ciphertext. So if we look at that, the most common ones are H and N. So one of those is almost certainly E, but we don't know which because two show up a lot. So you have to take a guess at one of them. So let's say we started with H, we'd go through there and replace every H with an E. That's the one you got started. You can then have a look and see if there's a three-letter word that ends in E. That's probably the. Then you can replace the T and the H, and then you've got a good starting point. You can look for anything else where you can make some educated guesses at what things might be. Like I said, I did this one and it was entirely doable. I didn't cheat, didn't use any help. I got through there in about 5 minutes. So it can be done. Have a go at it. So yeah, you've got the quiz, you've got the rail fence cipher to look at, and then the mega challenge if you think you're up to it. Okay, enjoy it, and I will see you all next week.